We are recording, so hello everybody and welcome to SIG API Machinery meeting. Today is November 17th of 2021. 2021 is flying away very quickly. We have a number of topics. We're going to shift the order because I think some people is still to join. I don't know if the daylight savings time change confused anybody, so we'll see. But we have Charles here and we can start with his topic and then we go through the rest as people join. So Charles, all yours.
Okay, thank you. So hello everyone, I'm Charles, software engineer from TikTok, and I would like to discuss one of the features I wanted to see if we can add it to the API server or API machinery. So this feature is come from our production environment. So things is the story is like this. So in a production environment, sometimes we will create the pods or some other workloads, and we will use some prefix to distinguish the pods between different group or different users. So for example, we may have a user ID as the prefix before something like the pod name. So in that case, sometimes the user wanted to retrieve, they wanted to retrieve the pod belong to them, or the administrator wanted to just retrieve the pods belong to a specific user. Then since we are using the prefix instead of the label, then it is very hard for us to retrieve just the pods belong to the specific users. So we are thinking about, is that possible to add a new feature that allow us to retrieve the pods or other resource based on the prefix or of a fields or the labels, things like that. Yeah, that's the description of this this features we wanted to add. And I do some local testing, and I found out that we don't need to change anything in the client Go. Instead, we can just add a new selector, implement a new selector interface, implement a new selector, and then we can support a regular expression to anything that matches a specific regular expression when using the field selector. Then we can retrieve the desired resource or pods or things like that. Yeah. I just wanted to hear some of the feedbacks or suggestion or comments from the community. Yeah.
So, question. Yeah. Is the idea here you introduce new syntax for matching a regular expression rather than literal, or just expand the interpretation of the literal match?
It will extend the regular match. So currently we have several operator, right? Like the equal, like not equal, or something like in, or something like that. So I wanted to add a new selector called something, a new operator called regular expression match, things like that. And when we use the field selector, then right now inside the field selector, we need to specify the name of the fields, then equal or not equal to some value, right? So I wanted to add a operator that can do, we specify the name of the fields and then a regular expression operator, then the user provides on regular expression, then we can match all the resource that can that meets this regular expression pattern. Yeah.
Thank you.
So you've mentioned both field selectors and label selectors, and they share some levels of evaluation and not others, right? Field selectors, for instance, don't exist for custom resources.
Correct.
Are you trying to add this capability to both field selectors and label selectors, or one or the other?
Yep.
Yeah, which?
So, yeah, what I try out is I try out locally and I just added logic to the field selector. I have not added to the label selector. And
to be clear, just may I clarify David's question, right? David, even for resources defined by CRDs, there are two field selectors supported, right, for the metadata.
Right, but not generic ones. Field selectors ended up posing a problem to us for schema evolution, and no additional field selectors have been added in quite some time.
Right. I think his use case, though, is on the metadata.name, if I understand correctly.
Yes, that's correct. That's the initial use case, but I think it can be extended to other fields. Like, I know some of the fields may not be allowed to be used within a field selector, but I think it can be extended to all the fields that allow user to use within the field selector.
The idea seems okay. I think that there's going to be questions about runtime complexity as we go to evaluate it. Right now, there are certain field selectors that, as I recall, are accelerated, where like indexes are built on them, and some of that logic relies on the fact that we only allow equality checking.
Yeah.
Right. I think it's pods and how they get sliced up by node is pre-evaluated, and there was one other one.
Okay.
It is. Well, I'll wait first and see if other people have questions.
Yeah. So, do you guys mind if I do a small demo? Maybe you can see what I have already tried out and see what I wanted to achieve in by adding these features. Do you guys want to see a brief demo?
I think your explanation was really clear. I'm actually
Okay.
thinking about next steps, right? Like if you were to write up a CAP, what questions would need to be answered in it, and who would be best suited to answer those questions, right? I think that the runtime complexity is probably the most difficult one to answer. And I would also try to look to see, we've rejected some changes for, it might have been ORs. There was some operator that we actually did say no to. I don't remember what it was. Finding that operator to figure out why we said no and explaining why this one is different would probably be helpful.
I see. So I think if we add those features, the actual time complexity will be called the regular expression library to do the matching, because right now, if we are doing a field selector, we actually compare each. For example, if we retrieve 10 pods, we will try to match the specific fields of each pod one by one, right? So if we are adding a regular expression, then that will be, instead, we are not going to compare the value of the fields of each pod one by one. We will still do this, but we are going to use the regular expression to do the match instead of just use the equal symbol to do the comparison. There
we go. Layla found it. And it was actually regular expressions, probably for the exact same reason of runtime complexity. So I don't know whether Jordan has expanded on the explanation in any time since, but that's the one that I'm reminded of, and runtime complexity does concern me.
So yeah, David, let me try to just spell it out, I think, right? The idea here, I think that David is pointing to is that we have a shortcut so that in the case of equality, which is what's supported now, for particular selectors, for particular resources, we have a shortcut so that at query time, you don't have to fetch all the resources and examine them one by one. Rather, there is a maintained cache of just the resources that match the selector. So that's the runtime efficiency improvement that David is pointing to. Works for equality, and the question is, does that work for irregular expressions? Now, I would think that it would. I mean, you could, right? It would just be I mean, you can still make a cache of things that match a regular expression, right?
I'm not sure, but there's also the cost of evaluating it is significantly higher. I don't know exactly how much higher, but these get evaluated by iterating over a list and in memory, right? So if we provide the ability to run a regex for a filter, it could get pretty expensive.
Well, so we have two cases, right? One is trying to have an accelerator that pre-caches the answer, all right, in which case the regex doesn't have to get evaluated, or does it would it redundantly get evaluated anyway?
As I recall, the caching mechanism that was built so far is intended to narrow the scope, but not fully replace. So it's allowed to have, as I remember it, it's been a very long time since I looked at it.
I think we looked in that code recently. I think you're right. So it doesn't eliminate the checking. It just reduces the number that are looked at. Yeah, and if I recall correctly, in Go, you can't make a read-only compiled regex, right? You compile a regex and then it's a mutable thing. You use it sequentially, right? So that is really a pain. Yeah, so have you done any profiling of this cost?
I have not done any profiling for now. I just try out my idea and it looks like it works. And I have one more question. So the cache you just talked about is the cache of the how can I say that? It's not the cacher of the API server, right? It is something else, right? The regular expression, maybe the implementation of the regular expression library. That's the main concern, right?
No, we have a cache used for, we have an index that is built to accelerate certain field selectors. And the idea was that it could eventually become, if it gets requested enough times, we pre-compute the index. And that's also part of the reason why it's a limit the scope but not be a perfect match. So, I mean, writing up and describing the idea and describing the benchmark cost changes to adding it is going to be important because, I'm cautious of adding something with an unbounded regex capability. And in the same way, Jordan didn't elaborate, but I expect it was the same reason he was concerned about it as well.
I see. Okay.
Another thing, one other thing I was kind of curious about is what are kind of the motivating examples that we would have that we can't already support with the existing features? For example, like if you're just prefixing something with the username, that sounds like something that maybe the recommended approach would be put that in the label instead, and then you're good. So do we have like a really good use case of like, this is the thing you would need this feature for because you can't do it another way?
Yes, but sometimes we are not just using a label. We may use something like the field. So maybe we have two scheduler and we wanted to multiple schedulers and we wanted to retrieve pods that has a specific scheduler name, things like that.
I'm not sure I understand the answer. I mean, in your original use case, right? You didn't explain why you couldn't also have a label that contained the username.
So the label things, we can actually have a label, that's okay. But sometimes, but I think it's in our specific case, like we just not adding a label for the end user. So the end user will not touch the Kubernetes cluster directly. So they're using their own runtime interface. And then we will create a pod for them. So that's the initial design. Some of the problem, we can add a label, that's okay. But later we found out that we may still want a similar features that allow us to filter out some pods or other resource by the specific field. The example I just mentioned, like the scheduler name of the specific field, specific pods.
Well, again, since you have your own API and the kube cluster is hidden behind your code, right? You could put a label on anything you want as long as it really looks like selecting a literal.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. We can add a label for everything. That's okay. Yeah, but yeah, I just wanted to see is that possible to add these new features, because I think it may be useful in some case, like people may not want to add a label to their resource. Yeah.
It certainly made sense to ask. I think it was good to come and ask. And I think concerns are going to be around the scalability of the approach. And Joe's question was actually also good. If there's another way to solve it, we would probably recommend that and avoid bringing in the initial or bringing the additional cost to the API server.
I see. Okay. So what about if I do some profiling? If I just test out the using the regular expression to do the filter selector with the filter selector, do you think that's a reasonable next step?
I do. I think being able to describe based on a benchmark test how much more it costs on reasonable sized data, and also exploring the use cases to see if there's one that can't be solved by add the label that means the thing that you want.
Okay, that sounds good. So do you think I should write up an KEP, or just I'm not sure where should I put this, like the result of the profiling and everything and other things?
Some of it will depend on what you come back with. If you run the profile and discover that it is significantly more expensive, the answer is probably going to be, KEP is still useful, just so that we can say no and here's why. Or if you discover that all the use cases can be resolved by clever management of labels, I suspect you get a similar answer, and you may want to mention it on the mailing list. Does that match your expectations, Joe?
Can I say I'm a little confused, because I think the concerns that we saw on the screen, maybe didn't talk about out loud, were that we're putting costs in the API server under control of the users, right? The users can really blow up the CPU usage of the API server using this mechanism, and right. The problem is bounding how much, right? He may have regexes that are cheap to evaluate, but if we allow any regex, right, there's a concern there.
Yeah, I think that a benchmark will show that. Or are you saying that, proposing a benchmark is just setting them up to gather the information that'll say, and here's why?
Well, I think the question, right, one of the concerns is it's not just the regexes that he expects will commonly happen in TikToks, but the question is, are we setting ourselves up for a problem if we allow users to submit any regex, right? What if hostile users, or just not very careful users, submit extremely costly regexes?
Yeah, I guess I'm saying I would expect the benchmark to show those as well.
Well, that depends on the space that he explores in the benchmark, and
okay.
how, right? So that first up be an important thing to say, and the others, I don't even know how to tell him what space to explore. Right? I mean, how do we bound the cost of a regex? And the other thing I wanted to say about the costs here, we've talked about two ways of doing this, right? Let me just finish the alternative here with the accelerator, right? The accelerator doesn't result in any shortcuts in the per item evaluation, but I think it could, right? I mean, we could set it up so that when we use the accelerator, we cut that part out of the evaluation that happens after something comes out of the accelerator.
I probably don't have appetite for that much complexity. My suspicion is that when you actually run and try to figure out how much additional cost it is, the additional cost of a regex will actually be extremely high. And so the outcome of finding a benchmark is going to be, this is too expensive to support server side. That's what I suspect will happen.
Okay, but to really allay the concern of someone who is hostile or careless and submits a really complex regex, he needs to benchmark with really complex regexes.
Yes. I guess in the end, I think it's unlikely that we will be willing to accept the cost because these are evaluated server side. But I wanted to be fair in terms of why. The why is the runtime cost of running a regex from user.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Okay, that makes sense. Just one last question. Because I'm not quite familiar with the API server code, so you just mentioned that we have a cache, we specifically or indexer that help us to accelerate the FieldSelector, right? Do you know where can I find the source code or documentation that describe how does the cache work
I don't
to
believe
accelerate FieldSelector?
It is in, I believe it's in the watch cache list evaluator. I don't think we externally did it. I externally exposed it because it was internal detail.
I see. Okay, I got it. So I will try to figure out it myself. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, but yeah, the issue is the cost, right? And I think a benchmark will show you that. You can write a regex that's very expensive to run.
Oh, okay, I see. So so one last question is, all the FieldSelector operation will go through this cache, right? There is no way like we can just not using the cache, just go to the etcd directly.
Well, going to etcd directly makes the cost on it even worse. And I don't know whether we built a bypass in or not. I think we special cased like 4 things and made it possible to extend. I don't remember whether we did or not.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I will try to do the benchmark and try to see the cost. Yeah. Thanks for the suggestion and comments.
Very good. Thank you, Charles, for bringing this here. Thank you, everybody, for your opinions. I took some action items here in the notes. I think, Mike, we are going to go next with your topic because I don't see Stefan or the other person.
Well, that's too bad. I really would have liked Stefan's review of my issue, but all right. So this came up from some colleagues who, like me, we like Kubernetes API Machinery and like to build stuff using it. So they built a system and they wanted to scale to manage hundreds of thousands of widgets. So they have managers who are people. A given manager will manage a subset of these widgets, but potentially a large set of these widgets, right? So they define a custom resource for widgets. They built a UI for managers. They want in the UI for a manager to be able to see his widgets a page at a time in alphabetical order. So there are 3 interesting features there, of which the Kube API server today supports 1, right? The pagination, filtering by authorization, and sorting. So what they did was they built a high-level API server that supports all 3 features. So when it's hit with a request for the next page, the implementation is to go off and get all the widgets and do the filtering by authorization, do the sorting, and the pagination. So, a request for 1 screen full of widgets turns into a request for hundreds of thousands of widgets. So, at the end of the day, these guys did a lot of implementation work and produced something that performs very badly. And I was wondering if we put these other 2 features, the filtering by authorization and the alphabetizing, sorting by sorting, into the Kube API server or API server library in general, right? In a way that keeps passed efficiently through to etcd, could we do that? And would that be a good? I think really could we do that? I think if we could, it seems like it could be a helpful thing to do. Now, someone replied, I sent this out to the mailing list, and someone replied, well, by the way, remember we have this watch cache, which accelerates things, some cases, right? So we have this taxonomy, right, of the cases that hit the watch cache and the cases that don't. So yeah, this is true. And I don't know what the cost would be in the watch cache. I'm not the greatest expert on etcd. I mean, the keys are there in alphabetical order, right? I mean, is it already the case that etcd is returning things in alphabetical order? And if so, why did these guys have to do anything about that anyway? Or maybe that was just not really something they had it to do. So that's about where I'm at.
Or they wanted to sort by something other than name.
Well, the use case they told me, I think they just wanted it alphabetized. But yes, like one could imagine that, indeed. And of course, that would be harder. That would place a bigger demand on etcd, which again, that raises a logical cost question. But anyway, so this is the issue I wanted to bring to you guys. ACL
filtered views. So a view of a resource filtered by your ability to see that particular resource is extremely expensive to build and difficult to order globally. So there's one case where you have to say manage the RBAC rules, and that's technically solvable. But when you add in the remote authorizers that are allowed by Kubernetes, it is no longer efficiently solvable.
Okay, good point. So let's break that down. So for authorization by RBAC, right? I think you can look at the RBAC config objects and compute a filter to send into etcd, right? They would just be more the same kind of content filtering we already have, right?
I don't believe so. I know of one API that has done this successfully, and say successfully, semi-successfully, and that's the project API from OpenShift. I don't know, and it's built on primitives that are slightly different than what's available in Cube. I don't know of another generic one. And the OpenShift one actually has an issue where it does not have consistent semantics for a list watch with resource version.
Is that inherent in the idea of filtering by ACL?
It is.
Can you explain the
Sure.
issue there?
So let's imagine you were trying to filter namespaces. It's a common one, right? I want to see the namespaces I'm allowed to see.
Okay.
And so you hit API server 1 and you say, give me the namespaces I can see, and you get back a list of namespaces and a resource version.
And is this from hitting the watch cache or going to etcd?
It doesn't matter either case.
Okay.
And so you get back a resource version, and you go to another server and you say, I want to watch from this resource version. But in the interim, or even if it isn't in the interim, and it's just a matter of what level of RBAC permissions have been observed up to a particular point, then you do the read from the second server, and there was a namespace that you were granted access to in between the list and the watch from the perspective of the server, because you're talking to two different servers.
Mm-hmm.
Or even if you're talking to one server and it's just latent, right?
Mm-hmm.
You hit it and you miss that namespace in the watch.
I see. Yeah. This reminds me of, another thought that I had in other contexts, right? The fact that we're splitting this into a separate list and watch operations this is another way that is problematic, right? Maybe what we really ought to do is skip the list and put into the watch stream, we could have varieties of watch to start with a list, right? So put into the watch stream a marker that says, oh, by the way, you finished the initial list, right? And then we wouldn't need two operations.
I think that our API provides a guarantee about what it means to be at a resource version. And that if you have a list and it shows you a particular resource version, you have expectations that that is consistent, that resource version, no matter when you list it, it will always have the same content.
Well, I agree. We do now, and you can put it that strongly if there's no filtering by authorization. If we were to introduce filtering by authorization, yes, you would have to, I think, qualify that understanding that whatever you get back is not just a question of the resource version, but a question of what the server currently thinks you're authorized to see.
I don't envision us changing the API semantics in that way.
Because
it becomes incredibly difficult to reason about, and it means that different users will get different views, right? I said there was one practical example that had been built out of this, and what we ended up building was something that was useful at human speeds, but you couldn't actually write programmatic clients to use.
So I don't. Okay, so let's talk about why it would be difficult to use. So yes, I mean, let me put it this way. All right, in some sense, I think the idea here is an expansion of what can be requested through the API. If one sticks to the old API, it would have the old properties. With the expanded API, it would have the relaxed property that what you access through an ACL filtered view would inherently be filtered by what the server currently thinks you're authorized to see. And yes, of course, by definition, that can vary from user to user, that can vary from server to server, and from time to time. If informers were able to use a watch without a list, because the notification stream included that marker, I think that would solve the difficulty that informers have.
No, because the informers still have to be able to rewatch from a resource version, right? Like when they lose contact today or when their watch streams are closed, they say, let me rewatch from this resource version. And if you can't have consistency of the meaning of a resource version across any API server, it becomes really, really difficult to do that.
Actually, yeah, even within a stream, it raises the question, what happens during a watch when authorization changes?
It did. We solved it, I'll say, imperfectly in OpenShift. But our problem was even more constrained than Cube, right? We constrained ourselves to only particular authorizers. We shouldn't do that in Cube. We won't do it in Cube.
Right.
And so it gave us different primitives to build upon. And I don't see a way to do it in upstream Kubernetes.
All right. All right. Well, thank you for the discussion. I have an expanded appreciation of the problem. Any other thoughts?
Sorting sounds expensive to do on the server.
Okay. Let me follow that one up. Sorry. Let me follow that one. Right. Is sorting on the name inherently done in etcd?
I believe it's sorted on the key. Actually, Joe may know more
Right.
than I do. I believe sorted on the key, and that actually is namespace first and then name.
Mm-hmm.
Joe, do you know exactly? Oh, I lost Joe again. I drive him away every time I ask him. Does anyone else know? Even if you're not Joe, do you know? I think it's keyed by.
Yes, that's what I meant. Of course, sorted by key. Right.
Okay. I don't know whether it's guaranteed. I do know that practically that's what it does.
I'll go back to these guys and ask whether that would be good enough. I'll admit I got the impression that it would be, and I was mystified a little bit by why they were citing that as a problem. So I'll just go back and follow up on that one.
Oh, sorry, I dropped off there. Can I still answer the question about etcd?
Please.
Yeah, so we do use the name in the key, and so you've got a B tree index based on that name.
So the results of a list come back sorted by key, right?
Lexically by the byte order of the keys.
Right. And so that's true not only of the etcd reply to the API server, but also the API server's reply to the API server client.
I would have to look at the watch cache again before I promise anything there.
Good point. Right. Yes. What about the watch cache? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I suspect it's right, but we'd want to check.
All right.
And to your last question in your email thread, it was about pagination, as I recall.
Yes.
I think we have an issue today. My memory says that that the watch cache does not support pagination.
Oh, that's right.
And if someone came up with a way to do that, I think that would be quite nice. I don't know how to do it offhand.
That's been a thorn in my side for a long time too. Let me put it on the agenda backlog. Maybe we can come to that next meeting.
I would love to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, my first question is going to be, there must be a solution to this already, probably in the etcd server itself, right? Can we use the same technique?
Well, in etcds, you know where you stopped your list, so you can just resume at everything after what you last stopped, as long as you're on the same resource version, and you can continue. So it's really
anyway, I didn't want to jump ahead. Let's agendize it for in the backlog. We'll pick it up the next chance we get.
Sounds good. Very good. Well, thank you for the discussion. I think for the next topic, we don't have Stefan or Sreber, and we are going to move it to the next meeting. And that leaves us to the last topic, which is hopefully very short. I was talking to some people on the community, and I noticed some people is not on, even close to the time zone that we are at. So for the back triages, I was thinking that maybe we could do it at earlier time for the Pacific Coast, like 9 or 9:30. So, well, I had somebody pinging me that, they were joining 2:30 in the morning. Like, that's really bad. And if they want, maybe, a couple of hours earlier would be good for them. I'm happy to run the meeting at that time, but I wanted to see if, anybody was against for a strong reason.
Being open.
Sorry, David. Go ahead.
I was going to say, being open to moving, it sounds pretty good. Normally we set up a doodle with a few options. Since you're the moderator, you would choose what's actually practical, and then people could vote. Right.
Here, the problem is that the process is, once we go through the issues and the PRs, they change the state. So we cannot just repeat the meeting item potently. Sorry. Sorry. So I was thinking, usually the Tuesday ones are the most heavy ones. So let's keep them. I think it's important, the times that you can join us and other people. And Thursdays, we can try as a pilot, maybe for the rest of the year. And then we see if, people join, make sense, or if very inconvenient. Sounds good?
Yeah, sounds fine to me.
Okay. Anybody else?
That would help me.
Okay, that would be great to have you back in those meetings. Very good. So I think I will make the change. I don't know if tomorrow, depending on my agenda, but and by the way, next week is Thanksgiving, so I canceled that Thursday one. So maybe after Thanksgiving here in the US. Great. That's all I had. I think unless anybody wants to say anything more to the things we discussed, we can call it a meeting.
Hey folks, this is Mayank. I have just one question. Similar to how we publish scale numbers for how many pods, nodes, and things we can handle. Are there any similar scale testing or numbers published by any groups within Kubernetes or outside that talk about how many CRDs and CRD instances can the API server handle? I know it's very subjective based on how the controllers are implemented on top of those CRDs, but have people done any such scale numbers, and are there any guidances or best practices on how to go about it, or even like at some scale people would have to shard across CRDs across clusters? And when I say CRD, I mean CRD instances.
So the first thing I'm going to say is the way to approach that actually is not give, here's how many you can afford, but here's what it costs for a given number, right? So you would talk about memory cost, things like that.
Okay.
It's a large topic, I would say. On top of what Mike said, it depends a lot on the size of the machine and the implementation that you have, where the clustering is running, and all of that. I know internally at Google, we did some work, for the size of our clusters. I don't think that is public. I'm not aware of anything public. It's very relative to a lot of different factors.
Right, but I kind of want to echo the ask here. Right, I think having a cost model, if we could maintain a rough cost model, that would help people answer the question for themselves, because of course everybody has different machines, right? But if we had a cost model, they could answer the question, can I afford this on my machines, or what kind of machines do I need?
I think this topic is worthy of getting its own item on the agenda for later discussion. I don't know that I want to tack it on right here.
Yes, I agree. It's a big topic.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Very good. We can add it for next time. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for your time. Thank you for joining. I hope you're having a good week, and the rest of your week is even better. We'll see you next time. Have a good one.
Thank you.